Hi, I'm Ben Fuda, host of PBS Wisconsin's online gardening series, Let's Grow Stuff. Welcome to this year's virtual Wisconsin Garden and Landscape Expo. I hope you'll enjoy this special educational presentation, and remember, you can leave your questions for our presenter at any time by typing them into the chat, and we'll ask them in a live Q&A at the end of the session. Also, don't forget to stick around and check out everything this virtual event has to offer. From inspiring garden tours to an interactive exhibitor mall, there's something for everyone. And thanks for joining us. Now, please enjoy the show.
My name is Laura Pomathis, and I'm a registered dietitian. And today we're going to have a little demonstration, a little workshop about fermented vegetables. We're going to just kind of go into just the basics about how to get started with the fermentation, why we ferment, and a couple different methods, troubleshooting, that kind of stuff. So it's perfect for beginner level. And after the presentation, there'll be Q&A. So if you do have questions, either you can ask then, or I will give my contact information at the end, and you can shoot me a message. So a little bit about me. Like I said, I'm a dietitian. I'm very into fermented foods because of their health benefits. They're also delicious. I've been fermenting for about 10 years. And I just think it's one of the best things you can do in your kitchen for yourself. So you may be wondering, what does this have to do with gardening and those types of things? In my mind, fermentation is kind of the perfect kind of tangent to go off from gardening, because it is a method of food preservation that takes very little energy input. You can put up extra food, bumper crops from your garden without having to can them, which canning is great, and I'm not against canning, but it also, because it's processing food with heat and pressure, it does take away some of the nutritional benefits. So fermenting your foods, which when we ferment them, we're not going to can them in any way with heat or pressure canning. So it maintains a lot of the nutritional value while adding some more nutrients, because what fermentation is basically is the transformation of food by microbes. So in this case, when we're talking about vegetables, it's mostly going to be lactobacilli, which are also referred to as lactobacilla, lactic acid producing bacteria. Those are going to be the primary microbes that are at work here, transforming food from kind of one form into another. In this case, it's going to be something like cabbage into sauerkraut, or regular carrots into kind of a pickled carrot, so something like that. It increases the digestibility of some foods, making them easier to digest. Things like cabbage, that for some people can be a little tough to digest, makes them more digestible. Adds those probiotics. So those microbes that are doing the transformation are probiotics. So when we eat them in foods, it's a great way to improve our health, improve the health of the microbiome, which is that kind of ecosystem in our body of beneficial microbes that help all sorts of things, from digestive health to even mental health, immune function. All these things can be supported by a good microbiome. So we want fermented foods for the health benefits, but also because it's a great way to preserve the harvest. So it's kind of a double whammy. So like I said, we're going to do some fermented vegetables, but there's tons of fermented foods that you probably already eat or are familiar with. So, sourdough bread is fermented. Beer and wine are fermented. So all those are more like yeast fermentation, but it's still fermentation. So cheese, yogurt, kefir, kombucha, kimchi, all these kinds of things are, in addition to things like sauerkraut, are fermented. They're just kind of using different microbes, different methods. So something you're familiar with. And we're just going to start with these kind of basic methods. As far as special equipment you need, I love this type of fermentation because you don't need much. Any basic kitchen utensils you have are going to be kind of perfect: cutting board, knife, measuring cups or measuring spoons, measuring cups, mixing bowls, those kind of things. Mason jars are the vessel we're going to use, a glass jar. I like to use glass jars for especially beginner fermentation, because you can kind of make them in smaller batches and you can see what's going on because they're clear, and you can see what's going on through the whole time. Those larger ceramic crocks that are 1 to 20 gallons or whatever, are totally usable. They're great. I don't like them as much for beginners because, again, you have to make a huge batch. So if you do kind of miss the mark, there's a lot more waste. And you also can't see what's going on. It's a little more mysterious. So you may not know, if there's mold or something, and you have to check it a lot. And so I like to start with the glass jars. So those are things you already have. Wooden mixing spoons, I like the plastic lids for those jars because they're non-reactive. So the things we're going to be making are quite acidic and they're salty, and those kind of react with metals. So I like those plastic lids. And because they're not really touching the product, I'm not too concerned with the plastic use, although I do try to minimize plastic. The only kind of special things I think that I think you should be using for this are a kitchen scale. One of these is $20 or so. It's a great investment because a lot of the things we're going to be doing are by weight. And so it's really nice for accuracy in the kitchen. You can use it we use it for making coffee and baking and everything. It's a great investment. And especially if you're getting into fermentation, it's a great thing to have on hand. And you'll see why here in a minute. And the other thing are fermentation weights. These are glass weights. They're specially made. This brand is called Mason Tops, but they're specially made to fit in mason jars. And you'll see why we need them in a little bit, but they're a great thing to have on hand. So why don't we get started with the method? So there's going to be two methods we'll talk about. One is the dry salting, which is also called like the sauerkraut method. And then the other one will be brining, where we'll make our own brine. So I'm going to go through these. Again, this is a short presentation, so I'll be going fast. So if you do have questions, we can make sure that we get those answered for you. The thing to think about for both of these methods, or both of these different techniques, is that they are a method and there are some ratios you need to know. But other than that, the hard, there's not a hard and fast rule for a recipe. Which is nice because you can adapt it to whatever you have on hand. And as I start making this, you'll see what I'm talking about. So we're going to start with the dry salting method. And there's the two most important things you need to know for the dry salting method or the sauerkraut method is the ratio of salt to vegetables, which is 1 pound of vegetables is going to need 1 teaspoon of salt. So again, that's where the kitchen scale is going to come in handy. If you don't have a scale and you want to make kraut, just know that a medium headed cabbage is about 3 pounds. So you can adjust the salt ratio up to that 3 teaspoons, which is a tablespoon, as needed. Or you can, if you buy it at the grocery store, farmer's market, you can use a scale there. But getting a kitchen scale is a great idea. So you have the ratio, a teaspoon to a pound. And that, that's for cabbage. We're going to use green or red cabbage today. But you can also, add other vegetables in there as you like, garlic, onions, different spices. And I like to keep the amount of cabbage in there as about 70 to 80% of the weight as cabbage, because it is kind of the perfect vessel for fermentation. I mentioned the lactobacilli are the microbes we're primarily going to be using for fermentation. They are already present in and on the cabbage. We are just setting up an environment where they grow and thrive. So we're not adding any starter culture, anything like that. So cabbage is really perfect for fermentation because it has so much surface area, all those different layers. So it has a lot of potential for those lactobacilli. Also, it's very fibrous. So as we kind of work this sauerkraut and soften it down, it's still going to maintain some crunch, but it has a high water content. So it's going to help make its own brine. So it's kind of the perfect vegetable for that. So if you do add other things, you can add just about anything other than, broccoli, tomatoes don't work well for this method, but almost any other herb, spice, vegetable is going to work. You just want to keep the vast majority of that weight percentage as cabbage, and you can add anything else, but you always keep that ratio of 1 teaspoon of salt to 1 pound of vegetables. So that's one thing you need to know. The other thing is the basic process. And again, it's going to make it so you can turn anything into sauerkraut. So the basic process is chop, salt, massage, and then pack. And that's kind of the things you do up to fermentation. So I'll go through that making a batch right now, but chop, salt, massage, pack. So let's go through. First, you're going to chop. I'm going to take off any kind of floppy outer leaves. Sometimes cabbage has some leaves that aren't so great. You can set those aside. And this one was already pretty clean, so I'm going to take off any other outer layers, wash anything off. I'm going to cut off the stem because we don't need that, and I'm going to set that aside. So then you're just going to start to cut the cabbage and shred it as if you were making something like a coleslaw or something. You can do this by hand, or you could use a kraut shredder. You could use a food processor, whatever you like, depending on kind of your knife skills and hand strength and all those kinds of things. So I'm just going to shred it finely like I would a coleslaw. I would not use pre-shredded cabbage because it's going to have almost no moisture content left, and we want moisture because the stored water in here is what's going to help create its own brine. So don't get pre-shredded. Shred your own, whatever method you need to. Again, you can use red or green cabbage. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to put a mixing bowl on my kitchen scale. You can kind of see here. Maybe I'll make it so you can see a little better. And I'm just going to tare that weight. So it removes the weight of the bowl. We're going in pounds, so make sure you have the right measurement here. So I'm just going to start adding this to my bowl. So we're in the chop here. If you like a little bit bigger pieces, that's fine. But so I like to do a little bit finer shred. That's just my preference. So I did cut out the core, that kind of middle part. I'm going to go ahead and chop that up. It doesn't shred like the rest of the cabbage, so I do kind of take that out and cut it separately just into small pieces. It's super fibrous, but it does ferment pretty well and break down. So just going to do that. So I'll get us to a pound, so I can at least put a teaspoon of salt, and you can kind of see. I won't show you me chopping the whole head. So it doesn't matter how big of a batch you make. You could start, if you're really new to fermentation, you could start with just a small batch of like one head of cabbage or something. But the same method and the same ratio go for no matter how big your batch is or no matter what you add. So I do find that red cabbage is a little bit more fibrous, a little bit tougher to work with. It's a little bit drier, but it works great. It's very, very delicious. So we're about at a pound here. Might be a tiny bit over, but in general, we want it to be that ratio of a teaspoon to a pound. So I'm not going to do the whole batch at once because I'm going to just show you how to massage it in. So we did the chop. And now we're salting. So I like to use an unrefined sea salt. You can kind of see maybe a little bit of pink color. The brand I like is Redmond Real Salt, but any kind of salt that doesn't have any anti-caking, anti-yellowing agents, no iodine, you don't want any additives, just straight up sea salt. I like a fine grind so that you can incorporate it well. So we are at a pound. So I'm gonna add a teaspoon of salt. I'll use my teaspoon here. And this is why you want the measuring or the kitchen scale here. So chopped salt, you have to use salt because salt is going to facilitate the fermentation. It's going to inhibit mold. If you have too much salt, then it's, can be very antimicrobial, but we just want this ratio of salt that helps to keep out any unwanted microbes and let the lactobacilli thrive. So then we're going to massage. So essentially what I'm doing is, you can kind of see, I'm taking the cabbage and I'm just squeezing it and crushing it with my hand. So what that is doing is breaking down the cabbage. It's softening it, it's crushing it. It releases this juices so we can make this brine. And like I said, it will soften it and make it so we can compact it into the jar. So the reason we need this brine, why we're squeezing it and releasing its water, is so that the cabbage, while it turns into sauerkraut, can be in an anaerobic environment. So the lactobacilli are anaerobic, so they don't want oxygen. And so by creating this brine, by releasing all the cabbage's stored water and mixing it with the salt that we added, we are creating an environment where we can my hands are all purple now. We can push the cabbage down and let the brine kind of rise above that, and that creates a nice barrier between the sauerkraut and the outside world that's rich in oxygen. It doesn't have to be like zero oxygen, we don't have to put an airlock or anything like that. People do like an airlock, especially if you're gonna have to leave the kraut on the counter and not check on it, but you don't have to do that. putting a weight on top of this to keep it submerged in the brine will be good enough, and then putting a lid on top. So I'm just massaging this until it's nice and soft. It kind of should reduce by about half in volume, and water should be able to be squeezed out of it after massaging it. So if you have like arthritis or something like that, and have trouble with this step, you can always mix the salt and just leave it on the counter for several hours and come back to it, because the salt will, eventually pull some of that water out. And that's, that brings me to a good point, which is when we do pack this into the jar, we do want to leave a little headspace, and I'll show you that, so that any extra water that wasn't pulled out through massaging, and that is pulled out by just the osmosis of sitting in this salty brine, we want to leave a little extra room so that water does have a chance to kind of have a little room to expand without overflowing the jar or breaking the jar or something like that. So I think we're at a good point here. It's nice and soft. When I squeeze it, water comes out. Again, that is a little bit easier with green cabbage. So of course I just had to pick something that was a little more complicated. So I'm just going to pack it into a mason jar. I like a wide mouth jar for this because it is easier to pack things in. I usually use a canning funnel, but I honestly couldn't find it today, which is pretty fun. So I'm just going to pack it in. So we did chop, salt, massage, and now we're going to pack. So all I'm going to do is just put the kraut into this jar. So I'm just packing all of this in here. And if I just left the cabbage like this, kind of loose and full of air, it would just mold, because again, we're trying to create an anaerobic environment. So we've gone through the chopped, salt, massage, and now we're going to pack it in. So I like to use the end of like a wooden spoon or something with a wooden end and just start to kind of pack. You're basically tamping this down to, you want to compact as much cabbage down, kind of press together as you can. One, to, again, get rid of any air pockets, but it's also going to start to push up that brine. So it's kind of doing double duty here. So this could also take a few minutes, depending on how much you massage it. The more you massage it, the less of this tamping you'll have to do. But again, this is nice to have a glass jar for this so you can see how much air is out of it. At some point, you can also kind of just get your clean hand down in there and push and just compact it down. Purple cabbage is fun because it turns your hands purple. So you're just gonna press it down in there until you start to see some brine rising up and the air pockets kind of compress down. And then you just repeat that. That chopping and massaging and salting and all that. And you keep packing it in until you get to about the shoulders of the jar. Again, you don't want to overfill it. You can kind of see, this is a batch I did 1 week ago, and I filled it to a little under the shoulders. It was a smaller head of cabbage. A good, like a medium 3-pound head of cabbage should fill about a half-gallon jar or so. Everyone's a little different, but you don't want to fill it above maybe the shoulders. And so then once you've got that all in there, you're going to put your weight on top and press down. So because this isn't filled all the way, it's kind of hard to tell, but you're going to press down, and what that weight's going to do is, again, it's going to keep everything kind of under that level of brine so that mold doesn't form, or hopefully no yeast or mold forms, and that so you have this nice fermentation. Because those bacteria, their byproduct is CO2, you may get some lift, like a little bit of bubbles, which is why ferments are kind of effervescent, in the vegetable ferments at least. So, once or twice over the course of the fermentation, you may have to get in there and kind of press it back down to keep everything submerged. But one of the fermentation books I like, that's a good resource, is by Kirsten Shockey, called Fermented Vegetables, and they have a little phrase in there that is, keep submerged in brine and all will be fine. So you want to keep an eye on it to make sure that it's always below the brine, because that's where the best fermentation is going to happen and the less risk of any kind of unwanted microbes. And again, you may have to go in there once or twice and press that down. So it was something like this jar. Because it's been a week, it's already started to kind of come up. So I'm just going to get in there and press it down until some brine rises above it. And again, you could add any mixins you want. Some of our favorites are, that one's really garlicky, so I can smell that. Carrots, onions, things like, if you're making kimchi, you could use a Napa cabbage and throw some daikon and ginger and peppers and those kinds of things. You can kind of add whatever mixing you like, but it's just the same ratio of salt to vegetables and the same method. So once you have it all packed in here, we went through those 4 steps. Now we wait. So you let it sit on the counter, room temperature. You don't move it to the fridge yet because you need kind of room temperature in the 60s or so ambient temperature for the best fermentation. The kind of sweet spot is 2 weeks if you're kind of running with the normal room temperature. If it's colder, it may take longer, and you could add a few days to it, up to 21 days. If it's warmer, like in the summer, it may take more like 10 days. You wouldn't want to do too much less than that because you won't get as much microbial growth. If you like it a little more tangy, you can leave it a little longer. I wouldn't do more than 21, 28 days. 14 days is kind of my sweet spot. And again, checking for mold. If you see mold, toss the batch, start over. It's not that big of an investment, which is why I like to start small as you practice. If you see like a white film or something that's usually a yeast, I would throw that out and just check for those unwanted kind of signs and that it's submerged at all times. And just trust your senses. If you're new to fermentation, you're not sure, just smell it. If it should smell kind of like sauerkraut, it's going to have an odor, but it shouldn't be, totally offensive smelling or tasting. If it is, trust your senses and toss it. Once you've fermented it at the room temperature for 2 weeks, take out the weight, toss it in the fridge. I like to have a label on it when I ferment it, so I know what's in there and when I made it, and it will keep in the fridge for about a year. You'll probably eat it before that, but that's kind of the general rule for how long those things stay food safe. So that's the process. It sounds pretty easy, and once you do it a few times, you're going to be like, I can't believe how easy this is. So now we'll move on to the brining method. Again, it's just a method and a ratio, and once you know how to do that, you're good to go. So I'm going to make brined carrots. It doesn't matter what vegetable you use, you're going to use the same method. The only thing, like I said, you're not going to want to use for this would be maybe something like broccoli. It doesn't ferment, but this works great for carrots, garlic, onions, cauliflower. This is a method I use for just like cucumber pickles, although I do bump up the salt, and I'll mention that here in a second. Jalapenos. This is the method I use to make hot sauce. I just pickle jalapenos and garlic and then whiz it all up. So I'm just going to do garlic carrots today, but as long as you know the method, you can do it. So the method here is cut the vegetables, make the brine, submerge in the brine, and that's it. So it's going to be really fast. So I'm just going to slice my carrots into coins. You could use sticks, and that's fine. So this is the brining method, which works well for things that you want to keep in bigger pieces and you don't want to kind of shred and massage. So we have kind of these nice carrot pieces. These are great for things like to make like snacks out of. So it doesn't matter how big or small your pieces, you just kind of want them to be uniform. I guess you don't want it to be too big because you do want it to be, it's going to be penetrated by the water. So you're just going to fill this. Again, you don't want to overfill any jar. You can't see me chopping, I just realized, but I'll show you when I'm done. So I don't have to adjust the camera. Again, it's just carrot coins. So these are nice for a snack. You can toss them onto a salad, a sandwich, something like that. Same with the sauerkraut. You can kind of do anything with it. It doesn't have to just be on a broth, although that's delicious. We like pickled veggies on eggs, especially like kimchi on eggs. I don't know why, but it's so good. So I'm just going to fill this jar, again, not to the very top. I'm going to leave a little bit of room. I'm going to throw a clove or two of garlic in there. And if you're like really into exacts and recipes, you might not like this because it's kind of like you can just wing it and use whatever you got on hand as long as you use the method. So the method is chop the vegetables or more slice them, I guess. So then I just threw some yummy little garlic slices in this. This is nice and garlicky. Then you're going to make your brine. The ratio is a half a cup of salt to 1 gallon of water. So as you change the amount of water, you just keep that ratio, if that makes sense. So no matter how big or small of a batch you're making, as long as you keep that ratio, again, you're going to be fine. So I like to use that fine grain, no additives, unrefined sea salt, and then filtered water, because if you're using chlorinated water, it can inhibit microbial growth. So we're going to add our salt to the water here and stir it using that same ratio of a half a cup to a gallon. Some people will use I'm just stirring in the salt to dissolve it. Some people will use a starter culture here, like whey drained from yogurt, or a little bit of even brine from previous batches of sauerkraut. That's totally fine, and I love to do that because it speeds up fermentation, which helps keep things crunchy, but also lowers the risk of like kind of mold growing. So if you do use a starter like that, which will be in the handout, the ratio of how much to use and different things you can use, that will cut your fermentation time basically in half. So I've dissolved the salt in the water. It doesn't have to be all the way dissolved because it's going to sit here. And then I'm just going to pour it over the vegetables. Again, you're going to want to leave a little room because I like to put a weight in here as well. And I might overflow it. I might have filled it too full. I did. Let me pour it out. So you're just going to add your weight and you're going to press down. Again, you want to keep this submerged in brine and all will be fine. You're going to add your lid. And anytime you add the lid to your ferments, you do not want to screw it on too tightly. Again, the CO2 can expand, can cause breakage, so we don't want that. Let it sit on the counter for 10 to 14 days. You may go a little bit less on these, but it's around that ratio. And if you do add a starter, it's more in the 5 to 7 day range. Check for mold, check for yeast, toss it, discard it if there's any kind of unwanted growth. And you'll know when the sauerkraut and these are ready when they have that kind of mildly acidic, kind of fermented taste. And they're still kind of crunchy to your liking. You don't want them to get soggy, but that's how you know they're ready. There is no exact readiness test. It's more to your liking and when there is enough microbial growth for them to have some probiotic benefit. So anywhere past that, like 7-10 days, you should be good. But if you're adding the starter, it speeds it up because you're adding those cultures. So keep this on the counter and then transfer it to the fridge once it's fermented, where it will stay good for more like 6 months. There's so much water in here that they don't stay as like crunchy for as long. And so that's what you're going to do. If you do pickles, if you're doing like cucumber pickles with this, I bump up the ratio to 3/4 of a cup of salt to a gallon of water, because those cucumbers do have so much more water and they have seeds. And so you need a saltier solution for that. And I'll often throw in a grape leaf or oak leaf or something to help them keep crunchy, something with a lot of tannins. So that's that. That's the brining method. We've got the fermentation method. And with those two methods, you should be able to ferment just about anything from your garden. So I mentioned the book Fermented Vegetables. I also love the book Wild Fermentation by Sandor Katz, the book Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon Morell. And then there's thousands of blogs and Facebook groups and all those kinds of things for more inspiration and ideas. And if you do have questions, my contact information will pop up. It should pop up, but my email is laurapoerd@gmail.com. So you can shoot me a question. I also do have a private practice. I teach other classes and do some writing, food writing and things like that on food nutrition. So my website is laurapoerd.com. And so you can visit me there for appointments, other talks, and link to my blog with lots of other recipes, which is, the blog is Brine and Broth. So email laurapoerd. You got my website, blogsbrineandbroth.com. Follow me on Instagram for more fermentation ideas at Brine and Broth. And happy fermenting. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ben Futa, host of PBS Wisconsin's virtual gardening series, Let's Grow Stuff. Thank you so much for joining us for this year's virtual Wisconsin Garden and Landscape Expo, and we just learned about preserving our harvest through fermentation. Well, Laura is joining us now live to answer the questions that all of you were sending in during her presentation. And don't forget, you can keep asking those questions through wherever you may be watching, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, the live stream chat, or anywhere else. Also, don't forget that this presentation will be archived, so you can go back and revisit it at any time to refresh your memory or get answers to any questions that might pop up for you. So Laura, thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate it.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So we're just going to go ahead and jump in. First, I want to say I love the name of your blog, Brine and Broth. I just think it's a great alliteration. But as you were speaking, we had a lot of questions about salt usage. So does the type or brand of salt matter? Kosher salt, Morton salts, canning salts, flavored salt? I think a lot of questions about salt. So if you want to start there.
Sure, and that makes a lot of sense because salt is kind of at the core of vegetable fermentation. We need it for bacterial fermentation to keep us nice and safe. So as far as a certain brand, I don't think one brand is necessarily the only one to use. The most important thing is that there are no additives. Even some brands of kosher salt will have anti-caking, anti-yellowing agents in them, and those we definitely want to avoid. There is a brand of kosher salt called Diamond Crystal that doesn't typically have those additives, but again, just read the label. I really like those sea salts that are unrefined and have a little bit of color to them because their salinity isn't any different, but what they contribute in trace minerals is going to be higher. So the most important thing is to have no additives and to have it be non-iodized. We want it to be a fine grain and no flavorings added, no flavored salts. Nothing added, just anything where the only ingredients are sodium chloride.
Pure salt. Excellent.
Pure salt, yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for where people can find some of the tools you were using? You mentioned the scale and again the weights. Any sort of sources for that you really enjoy, or things that they should look for maybe if they're sourcing?
Yeah. For the scale, I use the brand Escali. That's just a really commonly used one in culinary purposes, I guess you would say. But I don't have allegiance to any brand necessarily. It's nice to get a digital one because you can get that accuracy with, however many decimal points past the straight up pounds. But you could, if you have just a manual scale, you could use it. It just won't be quite as accurate. And especially if it's hard to read or something like that, I would get a digital scale. Where you get it, I don't know. It's hard to want to recommend Amazon, but that's probably where you could get it. The glass weights you can get at all sorts of places, the co-ops. I've seen them at our hardware store. I use the brand Pickle Pebbles by the company Mason Tops. If you are going to look online for them, just make sure that they're made with lead-free glass and that they're made specifically for fermentation, so they are food safe.
Excellent. So Mike is wondering, can you use a plastic jar for doing this type of thing?
I wouldn't. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't work necessarily, but again, we're creating a high salt and high acid environment, and especially the acidity could lead to unwanted chemicals, I guess you'd say, in the plastic leaching into your food. So avoiding plastic as much as possible in cooking, to me, is really important, because of the BPA and all these things. But especially when you're putting something so acidic in there, I think it's really nice to use something like glass. If you don't have glass jars, or there is kind of a glass jar shortage right now, because everyone's putting their own food up, you can use ceramic fermentation crocks that you can find at all sorts of different places. Like I said, hardware stores, sometimes co-ops will have them online. Lehman's, Lehman, Lehmans.com has a lot of kind of like homesteady supplies. So you can use ceramic if you, for some reason, can't find glass, or you wanted to do a really big batch, then you go up to the ceramic fermentation crocks. The biggest batch really you could probably do in glass is a gallon. I haven't really seen a bigger jar than that, but yeah, I would not use plastic.
Gotcha. So Gwen is wondering, for when you're doing sort of your pre-preparation of the veggies, so before you actually start chopping and assembling, beyond just sort of washing with water, is there either things shouldn't use to wash, like certain soaps or anything like that, or other things people should do on sort of the pre-preparation side of things?
Oh, good question. I would not wash with any soaps, any vegetable washes, anything beyond just water. And if it's, straight out of the garden or something, you could definitely use a vegetable scrubber. But any kind of chemical rinsing that you would be doing would be taking away the lactobacilli that are naturally present. Like I said in the presentation, we're kind of creating this environment for the lactobacilli to grow, but they are already present in and on the vegetables. So by washing them with soap or a vegetable wash, we're really removing kind of those naturally occurring bacteria, and we're not going to get as good a result with fermentation. Also, those are just not necessary. You don't need to peel them or anything like that. Now, if you were using vegetables that weren't organic, or you weren't sure how they were grown, maybe you didn't grow them in your own garden, you just got them at the store, something like a carrot or something, maybe I would peel if it wasn't organic. But otherwise, I can't think of any special prep. I wouldn't put any bits of anything that's like brown or, things you would cut off if you're just going to eat it, like the tops of a carrot, or I think I mentioned this about the the cabbage, like with the stem where it, would have connected. I would cut that off because a lot of times that will have kind of like black on it or some mold. So, just as you would prepare any vegetable to use, just no soaps or washes, and any wilted or soft parts I would take out.
So Nancy's wondering, how do we know if something is either unsafe to eat or it sort of is ready to eat? But if there's something some folks should look out for again, knowing if maybe something's gone off or something didn't go quite right, how do we know? Great
question. Well, first of all, I would go by, sight and smell. Those are kind of the first. If you see any signs of mold, I would toss it. So that's going to look like spots and it's going to look fuzzy. There's different types of mold. So ones you may see maybe pink, orange. Those are the ones you definitely want to watch out for. Pink or orange. There's white mold, green mold, black, blue. It could look like a lot of different colors, but it's going to be spotty. It's going to be fuzzy, and I would toss that out. You may get some yeast formation where it's going to look more like a film or maybe a little bit milky or cloudy. Those I would probably toss too. One, the flavor is not going to be great, and they can cause digestive upset. Yeah, so those I would toss out. Or if it as I mentioned, it's going to smell like sauerkraut. If you've ever smelled it, it's going to smell pickly and a little bit, strong, like when I open my fridge, with all the ferments in there. But if it is very off-putting, I would toss that. Yeah, so any visible signs of mold or any, smell that's off-putting, if you taste it and you're like, this ain't right, I would obviously spit it out. 2 weeks for fermented vegetables is kind of a general rule for safety, because you hit that kind of peak microbial growth. So all of the kind of beneficial microbes are hopefully outpopulating anything pathogenic or unwanted. So beyond kind of trusting your own senses and using that general rule of 2 weeks and making sure that, everything you use is really clean, you're using enough salt and those types of things, you can get pH test strips. And some people do this for fermented vegetables or even kombucha or something like that, where the test strips would be able to tell you if it's got a high enough acidity or low enough pH, in other words, to kind of inhibit any microbial growth. And that would be, something that you could research what that number is. In other words, I would say, getting into some of those books that I'd mentioned, like fermented vegetables, it's really nice because there's visuals of what it will look like when it's not right or what that mold might look like. And so then you don't have to just totally guess.
So Wendy is wondering, does the quality of the water that we're using or the source of water make a difference? So well water, something that's gone through a water softener versus city water, does that make any difference in this?
To me, the most important thing is to use water that is in some way has its chlorine removed. I would not use distilled water because it's basically sterile, and we don't want to create a sterile environment, right? We want to create a probiotic environment. So not distilled water, and similarly with chlorinated water, which would be city water. That's antimicrobial, which is why they use it, but we just don't want it in our ferments. So whatever filtration system you use, that would use that. We use water filtered through a Berkey, but you could use whatever you like. Now, well water, as long as if it's safe to drink, it would be safe to use in fermentation.
So Janet's wondering, are there sort of common things we might have around the house that we could reuse if we can't get glass mason jars, so old pickle jars or things like that? Are there things we can reuse that we might already have?
Yeah, it does not have to be the Mason brand jar. Anything glass was pretty much going to work as long as it's round. So a jar that is squared off, like the edges are square and it's not a round jar shape, will work. That's simply because, as I mentioned in the presentation, the microbes will basically emit some CO2, and that will create some effervescence and expansion. And that can cause breakage in a jar that is not round, because there are weak spots in it. And so an old pickle jar is great. I love to reuse jars. So it doesn't have to magically be a mason jar. That's just kind of the one that, is commonly referred to. But a pickle jar or anything round and that is an evenly sized. So it just can't have any edges on it.
Perfect. So Robert on Facebook is wondering, he said he noted that, the finished product goes in the fridge. So he assumes that you sort of only make as much as would fit into a refrigerator, but are there other storage methods? Is this something sort of that we can put up and put in the basement or something like that?
Okay, yeah. Yes, you would only make so much as probably you could store in the fridge, because you don't want to can it, because canning will kill all the microbes, right? But you could store it in a root cellar. It might not last quite that year, span of time. Like I said, the shelf life, once it's fermented, is about a year in the fridge. It would last several months in a true root cellar, because it is essentially climate controlled. Obviously, there was fermentation way before refrigeration. And I've talked to lots of people whose German grandmas would take them down to the root cellar and have them get a handful of sauerkraut out of the barrel. So you don't have to store it all in the fridge if you made an extra big batch and you had a root cellar, but you wouldn't keep it at room temperature. I wouldn't can it or anything like that for longer term use. I have heard of people freezing it, not in the glass jar, but once it was fermented, putting it in maybe a food saver bag. It will get super mushy. It won't kill the bacteria because they don't die with freezing necessarily, but it will cause the cell walls to kind of rupture and it'll get real mushy. So refrigeration or root cellaring is fine.
Excellent. And so Anne is also wondering, she's heard of, Jessica is wondering, she's heard of some other methods to sort of create weights, either using big cabbage leaves or plastic baggies filled with water, sort of other things to sort of put that cap and weight on top. Are you familiar with any of those or have any thoughts?
Yeah, I've heard of using the plastic bag with water. Again, it works great, but it's just plastic interacting with this really acidic substance. So that would be kind of up to your own comfort level with that. It does work. I have used it. The trick is to make sure that it's a really watertight Ziploc bag, because we've all had those leak, and then you'll change your ratio of water to salt if it leaks water. I've heard of people using, those cabbage leaves. Now, those act more as a barrier between the weight and the cabbage itself. For any little floaty leaves or, chunks, it's not super heavy. So, but I will use those as kind of a barrier. There are ceramic fermentation weights that are, they're kind of in those half circle shapes that would fit into a ceramic crock. So they're much bigger, and they're used for those larger vessels, but I'm sure you could find them in smaller sizes for the mason jar.
So Di is asking, what about fruit? Can we ferment fruit?
You can use a little bit of fruit in some of these fermentation methods. Fruit is tricky because it has so much sugar that it will start to make you tend towards yeast fermentation. And because the bacteria don't want that much sugar. And so you can get things like more yeast formation on top, kind of that calm yeast, that film that's undesirable. It can also get a little bit boozy. So you definitely can, but you wouldn't go for 2 whole weeks or anything like that. They also can get a little mushy because they don't have as much fiber. So you would have to, it is doable. I recently made, or over the winter, I guess, made a sauerkraut that I put a little bit of apple along with carrot and ginger. But it was, for maybe a gallon of kraut, I put 1 or 2 apples. So it's not a huge percentage of the weight because I don't want to change that kind of, we want it to be bacterial fermentation. But if you're super into that, you could definitely look up some recipes. I just wouldn't only do fruit in these. If you were going to do fruit, I would also use a starter. So I've made like a lacto-fermented cranberry sauce before, and I use a little bit of starter of that liquid whey or some sort of culture from other fermented foods that I've made, and then I just fermented it for like a day or 2 to make it slightly probiotic and a little bit tangy without having it, possibly get yeasty or boozy. Not that that's always bad, but not in these sense.
Depends on what your ultimate goal is, yes. So we're coming into just our final couple of minutes here, so a couple final questions for you. How often or how much should somebody eat fermented foods? That's kind of a personal, it totally depends on the person. If you're just starting out with fermented foods and you haven't really eaten them before, I would start with very small amounts because they are very rich in these microbes. And if your digestive system's not used to them, you may get some side effects like gas or bloating or, some like discomfort, or things move a little bit faster than you might want them to. Or if you have things like IBS or Crohn's or colitis or something, then you might not want to eat fermented foods until your gut's healed, because it can cause some GI symptoms. But in a generally healthy person, and this is not medical advice, my general rule, or what I do, is have something fermented with every meal, even if it's just like a tablespoon. And it could be fermented vegetables, it could be yogurt or kombucha, or just a little bit of something fermented with every meal to help increase microbial diversity and help digest the food I'm eating better. But it totally depends on the person, and you would have to either play with it a little bit and see what works for your body, or if you have, an actual health condition, you might work with somebody to see if you're ready for those. So in our final minute, our final question, what else can you do with fermented foods besides putting them on a brat? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but do you have a favorite way to eat fermented foods?
With fermented vegetables, I'll stick with vegetables because I could really talk for way too long. I think my favorite way to eat fermented foods is on eggs. It sounds weird, and I mentioned it in the presentation, but something about kimchi on eggs is just for breakfast. So that's my favorite way. And it gets you like ferments first thing in the day, and you feel really proud of yourself and you get your digestion going for the day. So on eggs.
Start your day with fermentation. I love it. Well, Laura, thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your expertise with all of us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was a blast.
Well, as a reminder, this presentation and everyone else that you're seeing here today is archived at wigardenexpo.com/schedule, PBS Wisconsin Facebook page, and YouTube, so you can check these out anytime you'd like. Up next, we have a virtual Q&A booth with the UW-Madison Extension, and then some recap episodes of Let's Grow Stuff. So please stay tuned, and we'll see you soon.